Okay, so let's now start to scatter our leaves on the point cloud we exported from speed tree. So I'm gonna copy the same alembic that I've used for the tree and create a new geometry node. And okay, we name that oak leaves. I can dive in past the alembic node that I was using before. It's gonna call the tree again. I will just make a new alembic group to separate the point cloud from the other object. So let's take the oak leaf shader, accept, and let's make a blast to remove all the elements we don't want. So let's group one, delete non-selected. Okay, so yeah, we have a bunch of points like that. Let's make an unpack. So it's actually no longer a packed alembic, and I can have the access to the attributes. So if I click here, you see that now I have many attributes here on the points. And especially we have the transform matrix here, which is a matrix 3 and 3 by 3 that describes the transformation, rotation, and scale for each leaf. So let's take a new alembic and let's import our leaves. So let's go to job, Maya, bank, asset, modules, leaf oak, and let's take the version 3, which is the one I exported from the previous session, and let's unpack also this object so I can have access to the attribute as well. So now I see that on the primitives I have my object ID, which is an integer parameter, and I will need to have as well an ID on the point to decide which leaf is going to be on which point. So let's make for now just a randomized attribute. And we're going to create an object ID as well. This one is going to be on the point because we just have point on this one. And we want to use the uniform discrete randomization method. So it's going to make only round numbers. So if I check here on the geometry spreadsheet, I have ID ranging from 0 to 27. So on my randomize, I will also randomize from 0 to 27. So now if I look at my points, I also have, and I can just say that I just want a one-dimensional attribute. It's just one float. So it's using plain numbers, but they are actually float for now. So I have to convert them to integers, otherwise it's not going to work. For that, I can use the attribute cast, and I'm going to say that I want to take our object ID attribute, and I'm going to transform it as a substitute integer. And it's not going to make any difference because it was already a plain number, so I don't have to make any round or sale operation. Okay, so now I have object ID on this side, object ID on this side. I can make a copy to point, and I can take my leaf from one side, and be careful before to copy anything. Here we have to check the pack and instance option so that the objects coming from here are going to be packed and instanced before that they are applied on each point. So it's very important if you don't want to have like unique geometry and very heavy geometry that can flood your RAM and crash your scene. So before to plug anything, set these options. And it's very important. So we are going to use the object ID as our piece attribute. So it's actually the attribute that's going to deal with the connection, deciding which point is going to have which object. So now if I do that normally, if I go on a scene view and frame my tree, I should see that I have one leaf on each point with the same orientation than the leaves in speed tree. The size might be a bit different because I'm not using the same geometry, and I've generated a new geometry in Houdini without, without any regards to the size. So for now, I can also put a randomized color just to see a little bit better that we have a different leaf on each point for now. So let's use a color node for that. And there's a nice option on the color node that allows me to make a ramp from an attribute. So I can use the object ID. I know that this attribute is ranging from 0 to 27, and it's gonna remap these values on the ramp, so I will be able to see them. So I also have to specify that this attribute is a primitive attribute. Okay, so I can also pick some colors which are going to be more related to the tutorial. So I can put for example, a dark green on one side and a bright yellow on the other one. So it's just for preview purpose for now. So it's not going to be the color that we are going to use, but it's going to be easier for us to visualize what we're doing like that. So now, if I look on my tree, I now have randomized leaves for each leaf. But yeah. Also on my pipeline, I'm not using the transform, the float9 attribute as the attributes that here on the point. I want to use an orient attribute, which is a 4 float plus 1 p-scale. So it's actually 5 float instead of 9. It's a bit lighter. And if you don't need to have a different value on x, y, z for the scale, it works the same. So let's convert our matrix tree to a quaternion. So for that, I will use a point VOP. I will just plug this into that. Go here. Let's call our transform attribute with the bind node. So it's going to be transform. I'm going to say that it's a 9 float matrix 3. I want to use a matrix to quaternion node. Okay. And now I can just make a bind export. Nope, not bind export. Bind export. And I'm going to export this one and name it orient. It's also an attribute that Houdini knows for transformations, and the copy to point is going to use it directly to orient the point correctly. We can specify that it's a 4 float vector, so it's a quaternion. And to get the scale from a 3x3 matrix, we need to take the length of the vectors of the row. So here it's the x, y, z row, and if I want to get the scale x, y, or z, I need to take the length of each vectors. Here I will consider that it's a uniform scale, so it will just take the length of the x-axis. To do that, I need to convert my matrix to a vector. So I will take a matrix to vector 3, matrix 3 to vector, okay. So no, not the quaternion, we'll take the matrix, okay. And I will take the x-axis, and to get the magnitude of a vector, I can use the length node. So it's actually gonna return a float value, which is the length of the vector. So here I'm taking the x component of this 3x3 matrix, and I can export it as bind export as a p-scale attribute that is also a recognized attribute by Houdini. So let's rename it p-scale, and this one is a float attribute, so it's okay. So I can plug them like that, and you see that the orientation is going to work the same. And if you want to be sure that it's this attribute which is driving the orientation and not the transform attribute, because we still have the transform attribute on this node, we can make an attribute delete. And we can delete all the attributes that we don't need on this point. So I can just, on the point here, go and delete the hierarchy level, ID, mesh. We keep the orient, we keep the p-scale, and we can remove the transform. And normally, I should still have the proper orientation without the transformation. And now we just have one. We just have one object ID. Sorry, I'm not looking at the proper node. So we can have just one object ID, a 4 float orient, and one p-scale, which is much less information than what we have before. Okay, so for now, we have absolutely random repartition of which leaf is picked on the tree. But actually, for a tree that goes into fall, I would like to have more yellow leaves on the top of the tree. And you'll see later that I will also add a system that puts more yellow leaves on the side of the tree, which is exposed to the sun. So this part is going to be drying faster. So I want a way to control this leaf repartition. So also you see that some of the leaves are turning to bounding box. It's because of the limitation of the number of polygons that Houdini can display in the viewport. If you want to change that, you can press D in the viewport. And in optimize here, you can increase the number of polygons that can be displayed in the viewport. And here it's just instant, so it's not going to be a problem to display 100 million polygons. So it's just to be nicer to look like that. Okay, so for now we've made an attribute randomize, which was just randomizing one object ID attribute per point. Now we want to go a bit further, so we're going to use the point VOP, and we will build a new object ID by end. So let's dive in. We want to say that we want higher ID as we go up the tree, and lower ID when we are down below the tree. And we want them to range between 0 and 27. So how can we do that? We are gonna take the y attribute. So let's take a vector to float node. So I can just split the position of my points and just take the y value. And for now, if we check the values in the world, if we check at the py, we have values ranging from 4, from almost 9, 5 to 21. So it's not actually, I mean, it's not too far from the ID we have, so we could have directly used that, but you can have a scene with a totally different scene, and it wouldn't be the same values. So we will have actually to remap these values. So let's take a set range, or is it like a range, fit range, okay. So we want to make a fit range. So the value that we want to remap is the y position, and we want to determine which is the minimum value and which one is the maximum. So we've seen when we were going on the attribute geometry spreadsheet, we can see it directly like that, and we can enter manual values, or we can do also an automatic system that's going to automatically take the minimum value and the maximum value to remap them. How can we do that? We can use a bounding box node, and it's going to actually take the input object, and it's going to return the minimum value and the maximum value as x, y, z vectors. So again, we want to take a vector to float, and we want to take the minimum position in y-axis. So here we are going to say that the minimum input value is going to be the minimum value of the bounding box of the object. That way we have an automatic way to set this value. And we're going to do the same for the maximum. So I'm just going to duplicate this one and plug the max bounding box. And again, I'm going to take the max y as the source max. So now we have each point is going to enter this loop and say, okay, I have a value. My minimum value is this one. My maximum value is this one. And I want to output values between 0 and 1. Because I'm going to make the setup for now between 0 and 1, and I'm going to multiply at the end by 27 to actually have 27 for my object ID. So we can actually do that right now. Let's take a multiply. Let's plug the result of this, and we're going to multiply it by a constant. And this constant is going to be the maximum number of my object ID. So it's 27. And this for now is a float because each point have a float value. So I need to take a sailing rounding operation. So it's always gonna round to the upper value. So if it's like, let's say 26.5, it's gonna be 27. If you want to do the opposite, you can take a floor operation, and this is the opposite. If it's 25.6, it's gonna be rounded to 25. So let's take the sail, and now it's still a float value, even though it has been rounded. So we need to make a float to int to convert this data to an integer value, and this integer value is going to be our object ID. Sorry, I need to make a bind export, and I'm going to export this last value as an attribute called object ID, as usual. And this one is going to be it's going to be an integer. So let's choose integer. Okay. So now, if everything went well, we should have a random. And it's no longer random. We have the lower object have a 0 object ID, and the higher object have 27 object ID. So let's check it. Maybe we can check here. So it ranged from 0 to 27. So we are okay on this. But for now, it's like super uniformly uniform repartition. What we might want to do is to add some randomness to that. So what can I do? I can go back, and now I no longer need to use my attribute cast because I'm already outputting some integer, so I don't need to change that. let's actually save. That's a good point to save our scene from time to time. So now let's put some random on that. So how can I do that? Also, I can do something nice, like if I want to remap the gradient here, I can use a ramp parameter. And so if I use this this attribute, which is ranging from 0 to 1, and putting it in, oh sorry, it's before to actually multiply it by 27. So let's take this attribute which is ranging from 0 to 1, and we are going to put that. And for now, it's not RGB ramp we want, it's just a spline ramp we want. And I'm going to plug that in the input one. For now, it's going to turn to 0. It's okay because it's just actually displaying the attribute here on the upper level. So here I can just put this one back to 1. And now I still have my ramp, and I can play with it to actually remap where I want the object to start from. So from where I want to use the 0 leaves or the 27. Okay, so it's a nice remapping control. Now I want to put some randomness a bit so I don't have something that's that uniform. So I can use a random node. And for example, I can make a random value based on the PT number, for example. Or it wants so I guess PT number should work. So I have an integer input and it's a 1D output. And normally I should have a random value between 0 and 1 getting out of this. And I can actually let's try to make a maximum. And I'm gonna multiply this by a constant to change to control the amount of randomness we want to add on top of that. So let's just make a constant, and let's make, for example, 0.5 for now. So I have a random number between 0 and 1 for each point, which I've multiplied by 0.5, and I can put as a max value on this one, and then I'm going to plug this one on the ramp. So now, if I look, I have some leaves going a bit lower with this random brighter values. So the higher I go here, actually, the more we're gonna have some randomness in the leaves. So here the maxes might not be the best way to add it. I might also just add the value instead of max it. So it's like a screen value. It's taking the higher value of the two of them. So it can only go up. We could try with an add. So if I do add here, and if I just use this one and actually plug this one in the add value. Actually, it's before the fit. I want to do that. So I want to take the actual y value, and I'm gonna add a random value to it before to put it in the fit. And I'm gonna put this in the ramp. Okay, let's delete this one. And now if I increase this, I'm going to start again putting some randomness on the attributes. And if I want, because now I've added 5, actually my maximum potential value is no longer the higher value, it's the higher value plus 5. So I would actually need to, on the maximum source, also add this 5 value to have a correct mapping. So let's take this one, let's add 5 to my maximum bounding box value. And I say, okay, this is the potential input maximum value. And now it's working better. So here I'm actually adding more or less randomness in the position of my y value, and it's making it random on the gradient. 0, we have the full linear gradient, and the more we add values, the more we break the gradient. So we can choose how much of randomness we want here. Okay, so now we've managed to have a good control over the repartition of our leaves. So maybe I can also add a middle point, and I can just like select the first control, shift select the last control, go to B-spline to have a smooth control for my curve, and I can, oops, sorry, I'm adding too much point. I can actually, without touching the high and low ground, I can modify the look of my repartition for the brighter leaves. Okay, and if I want to put some more randomness, I can just play with this one to add some more randomness over the repartition of my ramp. So this is good. I would like to have one more control and have the ability to actually choose the one side of my tree and add some more yellow leaves. Because when you look at the trees during fall, the side which is exposed to the sun sometimes is tending to get yellow faster than the side in the shadows. So we're going to try to do that. To do that, I need to add some extra attribute on my point to have a sense of what's their orientation in the scene. But for now, if we have a point cloud like that, there is no normal that can point outward. So there is a node to do that, which is the fluid mesh, or it's fluid surface. And I can actually take my point. So I can take my point and visualize the result. So I might need to increase the particle separation if I want something a bit more blobbier, because here it might become a bit slow if I take a particle separation too small. So let's try to find a proper value. So this is not too bad. So now that I have a geometry with the normals, I can use another node, which is the mask mask by features. And if I plug that in my mesh here, I can just click on that, visualize the result of my node, and it's actually generating a mask attribute, and it's going to use a direction. So I can actually orient the direction of my sun, for example, and I say, okay, this is the side of the tree which is going to take more effect from the sun. And I could also, there is a cast shadow as well, which is actually convenient to avoid having these hidden leaves to get affected by the direction of the vector. So you see the cast shadow here. If I remove it, everything which is pointing this direction will have the attribute. If I activate the cast shadow, it's going to occlude a bit better. We can also play with the angle to be more or less tolerant with the angle. So now I want to blast all the elements which are in the mask attribute below 0.5. So I can make an attribute transfer, a soft attribute transfer, because I want to have the ability to control my softness afterward. So let's make a blast node. And okay. So I'm going to say arrowbars mask superior to 0.5, and I'm going to say it's going to be a point attribute, and I'm going to delete non-selected. So I'm going to only keep these geometries, and I'm going to use a color node. So just it's going to be a bit more visual to see actually until where we actually make the effect happen. And on the other side, we are going to put a black color, and we're going to use an attribute transfer. Okay, so now I will just plug these two. And with that, I can go in the condition, reduce the distance threshold, and maybe just play with the blend width. So that way I can make a soft effect of the fall, the additive yellow color. Okay, so let's go back to our point VOP. So actually, I want to do this one before my point VOP. So for now, it's not going to change anything because we haven't used the color for anything yet. But what I can do now is just go here in the setup. After my ramp, for example, because I don't want to remap the fall maybe, I can go and bind a new attribute, which is going to be CD. I want to take a vector to float, to take just the red attribute. And we're going to multiply this by a constant, so we can just control the weight of the attribute. Let's add a constant. So let's say that for now, let's put it to 1. And we're going to add these values, this time again as a max. So for now, we have values ranging from 0 to 1 here. Then they get remapped to 27. So let's just make a max node, and it's going to take the maximum value comparing the two of these. So now you see that we are adding our attributes from the direction to the system, and these areas which are exposed to the sun will take higher object ID and pick the proper leaves on the atlas. And so if I want to make a stronger or less strong effect for this, I can just multiply my red value to pick higher or lower number in the atlas. I could also, if I want, put another ramp. I will have to rename that, otherwise we will have two ramp, and I can rename this one ramp 8, and we could remap this one ramp I don't know, direction. So let's take this attribute here. Maybe we want to remap the direction before we multiply it. Okay, and this is going to be a spline ramp as well. I want maybe to expose this parameter. So what I could do is here middle click and promote the parameter, and we could do the same for the randomization maybe. So let's go up. And now I should reactivate this ramp, which when you create the ramp, I don't know why it always reset the position to 0. And here the input number is going to be the weight of the effect. And here I can remap the hardness or the softness of the full effect. Okay, so I hope I made it understandable. Now we have a nice control for picking which leaf we want on each point. And maybe I can do a UV quick shade, so we can actually see the real texture on the mesh. So let's go and pick the leaf oak texture. All right, let's take the albedo, and now we should be able to see it displayed on the leaves. Maybe I need to remove this color node, or yeah, for now the color attribute is also transferred to the object, so I could delete it, or say I don't want to transfer color. So this symbol is accept color. So now it doesn't seem to work. Maybe it's because it's backed object, I don't know. Let's try to put it after. Okay, this is good. So now you see that it's actually picking the yellow leaves on the tree where we have the higher object ID, and we are going to take green leaves when it's lower. So we might want to reduce a bit the randomness if we don't want to have if we want to have a clearly green leaves at the bottom of the tree. So maybe I can reduce it even more, and just to have a bit more clear green leaves at the bottom of the tree. Or maybe I can keep it to 5 and go on my ramp here, and here make the ramp bigger, put the parameters as B-splines, and I can add a point here to actually have more green leaves. And maybe I can make the effect of the direction a bit lower. That doesn't have, yeah, I don't have that way too much burnt leaf on the direction of the sun. Okay, so that concludes it for the setup on how to attach the leaves on the tree. On the next video, we're going to see how to apply the shader on them and run them with the rest of the tree.